After a tough day of fishing where you couldn't find the fly that the fish wanted to eat, you've probably read some articles, watched some videos, and maybe even listened to some podcasts about the best flies to use during any given time of year. You've also probably thought, well, this is all great information, but does it really apply to my local waters? The short answer is yes, it does. But as with anything in fly fishing, there's a lot more to fly selection than just memorizing patterns and dates. Once you understand the key concepts behind insect hatches, that makes picking the right fly a lot more straightforward. So this week on Untangled, we're breaking fly selection down to its core principles, giving you the tools you need to pick the right fly next time you're on the water. This is Untangled, fly fishing for everyone, presented by Ventures Fly Co. Hey everybody, welcome to it. This is Untangled, and I am your host, Spencer Durant. Having more fun than a human being ought to be allowed to have, but it's kind of hard not to right now. Fall is finally here. It's cold. It's not a bajillion degrees outside anymore, and there's 2 feet of fresh snow up in the mountains, and I really like that. And then as an added bonus, the BYU Cougars look like they are poised to absolutely stomp the Utes during the Holy War this week. So life doesn't get much sweeter than that, does it? No, enough football talk. I'll try not to slip any more comments in. This ain't a football podcast. We got some serious, very, very studious fly fishing content to get to. So please get out your half moon spectacles, your notepads, and your quills, because this is top shelf stuff that we've got to discuss today. I've done quite a few episodes just this year on different flies and fly selections. We did one not too long ago about the best fall flies to use. Did a show this summer on the best summer flies to use. And we just generally, like I said, talk about flies a lot because they're a huge part of fly fishing. And one of the most common questions I keep seeing after these shows, and then just in general, because we get so many questions from y'all, is something along the lines of, hey, I love your fly selection or your list of flies that you suggested that we use, but I don't live in the West. Will these flies still work for me back east or in the Midwest or on the West Coast or wherever it is that they live? The short answer to that question is yes, generally the flies in these lists will work that way. But the long answer, that's the meat of today's show, and I'm going to do my best to take fly selection down to its simplest forms so that we can all leave the show with the understanding of how to pick the right flies and how we arrive at fly selection choices no matter where or when we're fly fishing. So the first step to understanding that means that you've got to learn just a little bit about the general trends around when bugs are active at different times of the year. Now, these trends are going to apply to folks on the West Coast, the East Coast, down south, even Southern Canada in some places. I'm not terribly sure how applicable a lot of this will be in Europe, but I did take a little bit of a glance at some hatch information for rivers in the United Kingdom, and I think it'll translate pretty well there too. There might be some variance in the dates just because you're a little bit further north than I am up there in the UK, but it should generally translate there as well. So let's take a look at what those trends are. You are going to have 5 basic groups of insects that you'll encounter throughout the year. And these are, for simplicity's sake, the bugs that fish are going to eat 99% of the time. And up first in that group are the midges. These are the smallest of our aquatic insects, but they hatch year-round. So they're the only aquatic insect that will actually complete an entire life cycle. They'll go from their egg into their baby phase, into their adult dry fly phase up above the water during the winter. None of the other aquatic insects do that. So if you live in a place that allows for year-round angling like I do and like Alex does, we fish midges a ton during the winter. They're very effective. They're effective year-round, but they really stand out in the winter. In fact, I think it was last December that Alex caught a 25 1/4 inch rainbow on a demon midge. He caught that fish I just can't remember if it was December or January when he caught it, but he 100% caught it. Again, a 25.25-inch rainbow trout on a size, I think, 16 demon midge. So they will eat the midges. Even the big fish will eat those tiny flies. They're just a very effective fly. So year-round for midges. Mayflies be the next one we talk about. And these are the classic-looking fly that you see on a lot of fly fishing gear and a lot of company logos and whatnot. It's just a very good, classic-looking aquatic insect. They've got those tall wings, the long, slender, beautiful bodies, and they dance very gracefully through the air. They're the exact opposite of me. I can't walk up the river without twisting my ankle, it feels like sometimes, and then the mayflies just glide through the air like it's nothing. They're going to be most active from mid-spring through early fall, but their peak is going to be that spring, early summer, and then fall. That's when mayfly activity is going to be at its height. They're really not as active during the hottest months of the summer, but that early spring and fall mayfly fishing can be just incredible. Caddis will be the next one that we talk about. And caddis tend to be most active from late spring through early fall, usually until about that first big freeze of the year. Once things get really cold, the caddis shut off. But caddis, their activity peaks from late spring through about midsummer. They'll taper off a little bit in late summer, and then they'll bounce back a bit once fall rolls around. And the caddis, they're kind of the bigger looking bug. Their wings fold flat along their bodies. They look like little tents. And they come in these giant swarms. They're really fun to fish. And then stoneflies. These are going to be your next one. Stoneflies are kind of big, scary looking things. They've got a lot of legs, long antennae. They look like they're going to bite, but they don't, thank goodness. They're really just cool critters to hang around with. But they're going to be most active from late winter through early summer. Now, you might see a little bit of stonefly action in early fall, depending on where you live. And you might not see them during winter either, depending on where you live. Not everywhere is going to have, it's called the small winter stone or the black winter stonefly hatch. Not everywhere is going to have that hatch. Not everywhere is going to have the squala stonefly hatch either. It's very common very early on in the year, early spring when there's still a lot of snow on the ground up in Montana, Oregon, those parts, you'll see a lot of squala stonefly hatches. Stoneflies are most prevalent in the western U.S. and then up into Canada as well, where there's a lot of rivers with very fast, highly oxygenated water. That's the kind of habitat that stoneflies really thrive in. And then their peak activity is late spring and early summer. So that's when you're going to see stoneflies being on the menu for trout most often. And then finally, I'm going to lump a few different bugs into this other category, this fifth category of insects. That's going to include your terrestrial insects like ants and grasshoppers that fish will eat from early summer through early fall. With all the snow that we just got here, it's probably the end of hopper season for me. I was out 2 or 3 weeks ago fishing and still had fish coming up to eat my grasshopper, and that was very into September when I was out doing that. So it was really fun to get that late season hopper action. But now with the big freeze through, I think the hoppers are probably done. This group also includes our aquatic insects that never hatch into winged adults. They live underwater. Their entire life is spent underwater. This would be stuff like your crawdads, your little mini freshwater lobsters, your scuds and your sow-bugs, which are basically just freshwater shrimp. They're really small. And then your worms. Now, your scuds, your sow-bugs, and your worms, they'll be on the menu year-round as well. So if there's not a lot of bug activity happening when you get to the river, or you're just still not quite confident in being able to identify the flies that are out there, scuds, sow-bugs, worms, and midges are always a good go-to because they're always on the menu. And then crawdads do have to tend to have their own season from about late spring through early fall when they're the most active and the most available to fish to eat them. So those are your general trends. And if you're trying to memorize all this, or you're worried that you're going to forget it, you're like, Durant, slow down. You're going quicker than at a wing buffet. Like, I know I blew through it, but I did that for a reason, because we put all of this information into our year-round hatch chart. It's completely free. So if you want to have a reference guide for this stuff so that you can continue to work on internalizing it, I'll throw a link to that down in the show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. Super handy little guide that goes over everything we just talked about. So once you have those bug trends under your belt, you understand when generally the bugs are supposed to be active. The next thing that'll help in picking the right fly is learning just a bit more about your local hatches. Now, here where I live and fish in the West, we've got some unique local hatches that other places, even my local creek's a half hour from the house, and there's another river about an hour south where it doesn't get the same hatch as that little local creek does. We get a big green drake hatch, and then we get a big salmon fly hatch. The green drake is a type of mayfly. The salmon fly is a type of stonefly. We get both of those on my little creek and not at all on the river that's an hour south of me. So even within that tight of a geographic window, there can be a pretty big variance in what flies are actually active at given times of the year. Now, the local creek is very steep, a lot of fast pocket water, a lot of highly oxygenated water. Your drakes and your stoneflies tend to love that stuff. And then the river an hour south to me is a big flat tailwater, not a lot of rapids at all in it. So you got a lot more of your smaller mayflies, your tiny midges and stuff down in that type of water as well. Then there's also another river, another hour from me in a different direction that gets a really early blue-winged olive mayfly hatch. It starts coming off in like February some years. And usually you don't see blue-winged olive mayflies start coming off until the end of March in a lot of places. So again, a lot of variance just within a 2-hour circle of where I live. And that's going to be the same for where you live. Different areas are going to have unique hatches. The timing of those hatches might be slightly different where you live versus where I live. So you've got to do a little bit of digging just to make sure that you're not fishing stuff like a month or 2 months before you should be, just depending on timing. So there's a couple of ways to learn about your local hatches. You can go spend time in the river every single week. You can observe all the bugs. You can try to match the bugs that you see on the water to real life insects on Google, just Googling, what is this bug? Just trying to describe it. That's not a bad method, and I still use it sometimes myself. In fact, this past spring and summer, we had some mayflies hatching here on the local creek that I honestly couldn't tell what exact type of mayfly they were. I didn't know if they were some kind of Hendrickson or if they were some kind of drake. I just really couldn't make my mind up. I'm leaning towards them being drakes just because they're a little bit bigger and a little bit thicker bodied than Hendricksons that I've seen. But at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter because I just used a large parachute Adams to imitate them and the fish ate the fly. So what I was doing seemed to work, which is really nice. And I'll get to matching flies. We'll talk about that in just a second. But that's one way. You can go out, spend the time on the water, and try and troubleshoot your way through it. And that's not a bad way to do it. It does require quite a bit of observational time, maybe a little bit less fishing time, and then a lot of work on the back end when you get home to try and identify what those bugs were and then pick out patterns to match them. Another method that you can also employ, and I would say that trying to do both of these is most effective. You're going to get the best bang for your buck if you can do both of these. But this other method for learning local hatches is stopping into a fly shop and asking for help on that intel. Because a lot of times, folks are going to walk into a fly shop and they're going to ask, what flies do I need if I want to catch fish right now? And they hear that all the time, and they'll just give you the flies and get you on your way, which is great. They're being helpful. But if you go in, and this is the question they don't hear as often, if you go in and ask, hey, what bugs are hatching right now, and how can I tell the difference between them? That question, that's going to, if it's a good fly shop, that's going to light a fire under the fly shop guys, because they're going to want to talk to you. They're going to see, oh, this guy's trying to learn. He's trying to figure this stuff out. And that's going to make an immediate connection with a lot of the fly shop folks that I've had the pleasure of working with. And they are really going to be able to walk you through the different hatches and help you learn a lot more behind them. Because if you just try to memorize fly patterns, you're not really learning as much about fly selection as you should be. You need to understand why you're using this pattern at a certain time of the year so that you can pick the right fly wherever and whenever you're fishing, not just when you're on the river that you fish most often. So fly shops are a great place to go and start to learn that information and really pick the brains of people who are on the water as much as they can be and have a lot more experience most of the time than we do. So definitely go check your local fly shop. And then the last thing you can do as well, there's a ton of information about fisheries online. I would be really surprised if you looked up fly hatches in my local area, whatever, and you didn't get some kind of good result coming back to you. There's a lot of good information online. Definitely go through that. If there really is absolutely nothing online that gives you an idea of what bugs might be hatching at a certain time, you can fall back on our hatch chart to help give you a general idea of when the bugs should be active. Okay. So we've talked about the general trends, giving you an idea for that, giving you a couple resources on where to learn about your local hatches, because that will inform a ton of fly selection. And still, when I go on trips to rivers I haven't fished before or places that I've only fished once or twice, I do a lot of this myself. I'll call a fly shop. I'll look online. I'll look and see, what's the timing of this hatch? Are there any specific types of mayflies that get there that I don't have? Are they bigger or smaller than the mayflies that I get on my river? Are they a different color? I'll go through and I'll just try to fine tune, make sure I've got the flies in my box that'll match that. And it's something I still do, even though I know a fair bit about fly selection. I still want to prep myself as much as I can. So I'm going into it prepared, right? So we've done those two things. Now we've got to talk about how you're going to match the flies in your box to the real life bugs that you see in the water. Now, I mentioned during that mayfly hatch that was going on during my neck of the woods during, I think it was May and June, is what I said. I really wasn't sure what those mayflies were. I could tell they were a mayfly, though, because they had those tall, upright wings, the long, slender body, the very fine tails. I know what a mayfly looks like. They're fairly easy to recognize once you, even if you just Google a picture right now of what does a mayfly look like, you'll be able to identify those next time you're on the water. So I knew it was a mayfly, but I didn't know, are these drakes? Are these Hendricksons? What are they? I really didn't know because they were hatching at just a unique time, and they definitely weren't blue-winged olives, and they definitely weren't pale morning duns. I was just trying to figure out what flavor of mayfly these were. But the only thing I really knew about them is that they were bigger and they were darker in color than a lot of the mayflies I'd seen already that year. So what I did is I tied on a size 12 parachute Adams, and I used that fly because it matched the size, it matched the shape, and it matched the color. So it matched all three things of the real life bugs that I was seeing. And the fish ate that parachute Adams for as long as that hatch lasted, which it went on for a couple of weeks this year. It was a very productive hatch for a while. And I caught tons of fish on that size 12 parachute Adams for the entirety of the hatch. So it worked, even though it wasn't an exact match, because the parachute Adams is a fly that imitates a lot of flies in general. It's not one that imitates a specific bug. It still worked. And that's because I applied the principles of what we call the right fly formula that we developed here at VFC. And this is the foolproof way for matching the flies in your box to real life insects, even if you don't know what a mayfly is or what a caddis looks like or what a stonefly is. Doesn't matter, because if you follow these steps, you'll be able to match the flies in your box to the real life bugs that you're seeing. So what you want to do is the very first thing you're going to try and match on is on size. That is the most important. If you're fishing a giant bug and all the flies on the water that the fish are eating are small, the flies are going to ignore your big bug because it doesn't look natural. It's not like the food that's readily available to them right now. It's like if you plopped a veggie burger down in front of me and a real burger, I'm going to be able to tell pretty stinking quick which one's a veggie burger and which one ain't. Don't even have to take a bite out of them. I'll be able to tell right away. The fish are the same way. They're going to be able to tell, hey, something ain't right about this big one because all the other flies we've had today to eat are tiny. So make sure you pay attention to size first. That is the most important. The second thing that you want to try and match is the shape. So once you've narrowed down in your box, you've selected flies that are roughly the right size, then you want to look at the shape. Are the flies that you're seeing in real life, are they short and stubby with those tent-like wings, or do they have the tall upright wings and the long slender bodies? Okay? Take note of those characteristics. How many legs do they have? How many tails do they have? Do they have long antennae coming off the front of their heads or not? Once you're able to match those characteristics, you look for a size and shape match. And once you've done those, you've matched your size, matched your shape, then if you have a fly in your box that's an exact color match, go ahead and use it. But if you don't have a fly in your box, let's say you see those darker mayflies like I did, and you don't have, let's say they're brown, and the only big mayfly looking bugs you have in your box are dark gray Adams, dark gray bugs. It's okay. Color matters, but it's the least important in the right fly formula. And really the only time that you're going to get fish rejecting your fly because it's the wrong color is if you're fishing a very heavily pressured river where everybody and their dog fishes. So those fish have PhDs in telling real bugs from fake ones at that point. So if you've got the exact color match, go ahead and use it. If not, pick the one that's the closest and go with it. And it really is that simple. Okay, if you can learn about your general bug trends, learn that, okay, it is late fall, I should expect midges, maybe some caddis, and maybe some mayflies hatching right now. When you go to the river, boom, you're already a step ahead because you can narrow down in your box what flies you should pick, okay, at that point. And then, if you learn as much as you can about your local hatches, you'll know if there is a late season mayfly hatch that goes for a while, or a big October caddis hatch, or whatever it is that might happen in your neck of the woods. And then, if you can apply the right fly formula to help match the bugs that you're seeing on the water to the ones that you have in your box, you're going to be set for picking the right fly, no matter where or when you're fishing. It really is, just like with anything else in fly fishing, it's all about breaking things down to their key principles and then sticking with those principles as close as you can. So, if you've got any other tips or tricks about fly selection, you got any other questions about this that you'd like to share, go ahead and drop those in a comment. I'd definitely love to follow up with those in any way that I can. But we are going to wrap up this main part of the show and dive right into the Q&A section this week. And every week here at Untangled, we spend half the show directly answering questions from listeners and viewers just like yourself. So if you've got a fly fishing question that you would like answered, there's a link to send those in down in the show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. Todd from California has our first question, writes in and says, when nymphing, why not use a section of 10-pound fluorocarbon that is not tapered just like you do for streamer fishing? Does the taper help with nymphing? Todd, that's a great question. Thanks for sending that in. The reason that we use a tapered leader when we are nymphing doesn't really have much to do with the taper doing anything in the water, really, for helping nymphing, really so much as it does for casting and presentation. Okay, a tapered leader, one that goes from thick where you attach it to your fly line to thin down where you attach it to your nymphs, transfers energy from your cast a ton more effectively, which means you're able to turn over those heavy nymph rigs. So you've got 2 or 3 nymphs on, some split shot, a strike indicator. You're able to just turn that over a lot more effectively, a lot more efficiently, and you're able to be a lot more accurate with those casts as well. The tapered leader transfers that energy through and to all of those flies on your rig. It just makes the casting process smoother and a lot more accurate, okay? When I'm using just a straight piece of 10-pound fluorocarbon for my streamer rigs, usually I'm using a very short piece, and my streamer itself is so heavy that I don't tend to have very many issues with leader turnover at that point. I'm able to get those streamers where I want them because the streamer is so heavy. It pulls the fly line and leader along with it, so I don't have to worry about turnover too much. But with these really long rigs that we set up for nymphing, we need a lot of turnover to happen. We need all of that stuff to roll out and hit the water and be accurate with where it's landing. So that's best achieved with a tapered leader. Now, if you really want, you could take a page out of the Euro Nymphers book. What they'll do is they'll run a tapered leader down to a tippet ring, and then they'll just run a straight section of line off of that tippet ring usually. And then they can use that to attach their nymphs to. But even their leaders, they're very long and they're tapered. So they start thick and they go down to thin before they get to that tippet ring. And again, that's just because that taper is so critical to the casting process. And then another couple issues that you run into if you're going to use just 10-pound fluorocarbon for your nymph leaders is that you might have a really hard time getting that thick 10-pound line through the eye of a size 18 or 20 nymph hook. It's probably not going to go through there too easy. Be like me trying to squeeze through the turnstile at Disneyland or whatever. It's going to be just too big to fit. And then the other thing is that line's going to be a little too thick in the water. So it's not going to wiggle. It's not going to let the fly wiggle and move as freely as it could with thinner line. And that movement is very critical to the nymphs drifting and looking natural as well. So taper leaders, they're the go-to for nymph rigs for a reason. And hopefully that explains that for you. So again, good question, Todd. Thank you for sending that in. Ryan from Colorado has got our next question, writes in and says, Spencer, my wife and I started learning fly fishing this summer, and your podcast has been a huge help along the way. Let's just say it's feeding the new obsession. My question is this. For 2 of the last 3 weekends we've been out, I've caught a fish in the first few casts, like 3 or 4. Both times on a hopper dropper, once a 10-inch rainbow and once a similar sized brown. Once was in a canyon that's about 11 miles long and once in some headwaters. Both ate the dropper, and both days we got skunked for the rest of the day. Any ideas what could be happening, or is it just bad luck? Ryan, congrats on getting started. Sounds like a blast. You're welcome. Your bank account will never be the same. It will hate me, but hopefully you don't at some point. No, it's a great obsession, man. Welcome to the club. Without going fishing with you, it's hard to say for sure. It's hard to diagnose exactly what the issue could be. But when I read through your question, I thought on it. 2 things came to mind immediately. So those are the directions that I'm going to go. You're either getting fatigued and something about your presentation just isn't as good as it could be, or you're focusing too much on one type of water throughout the day. So let me go into those in detail, explain what I mean here for you. The fatigue issue. I see this with newer anglers. I even see it with myself at times if it's been a while since I've been on the water. It's really easy to get tired from fly casting, re-rigging, and catching fish. Especially if you're brand new to this, even quickly into the day, if you're just learning, it's not a natural movement to fly cast. There's a lot of mental concentration that goes into it as well. You're still building some muscle memory. It's very easy to just get tired quickly, and then your cast and your presentation start to get a little sloppy. So even though you succeeded very early on by catching a fish, my advice is to make sure you're not slacking off on your technique at all or your presentation. Because remember, your job is to catch, or your job is not to catch fish. Your job is to put a fly in front of fish and make it look real. Okay? So if you're not catching fish after you've already caught one, you've got to step back for a minute and ask yourself, what are you doing differently? Are you letting drag on your flies? Are your casts hitting the water too hard? Did a hatch start? And you're not matching the bugs that are coming off. All of these things, they're little things, but they add up to not putting flies in front of fish and making them look real, and then not having the opportunity to hook and catch a few of them. You really got to make sure you're paying attention to all those little details and take that step back if you're running into some serious problems. And then the second thing that I mentioned, where you're focused on one type of water too much throughout the day. This is something else that I see quite often. And I'm guilty of this myself too. I'll do this way too often, where if I go out and I catch a fish in one type of water, it's really easy to get laser focused on fishing only that type of water. And then you may not even realize it, but you start skipping over other water that might have fish in it. Okay. I'll give you a little example. Last spring, I was on one of my favorite rivers, and there's this section of it we call the rock garden because there's a bunch of boulders that stick up, and the fish like to hang out all around those rocks. So we'll go fish it. And it was early spring, or not early spring, it was about mid-spring. And I caught a ton of fish that day in this rock garden. And then there is a bunch of shallow riffles and then some more rocks and a little bit deeper water and runs in between this rock garden and another spot. So I fished the rock garden, caught a bunch, and I was moving upriver to go fish that other spot. And I spooked a whole bunch of nice fish that were holding in these shallow riffles upstream because I was laser focused on finding a little bit deeper, a little bit slower water, a little bit more structure, because that's where I just caught a bunch of fish. It hadn't even entered into my mind that, hey, it's spring, the bugs are active, the fish are probably in the riffles too. They're probably everywhere right now and taking advantage of these active bugs and just eating as much as they can right now. So I skipped through that water. I spooked a bunch of fish, went back about a week later, and I went ahead and fished through all of the water, not just the rock garden, but the riffles as well. And I had one of the best days I've ever had on that river. I cleaned up on some really nice brown trout. And again, that was just last year or this spring. Yeah, it was very recent. So this is something I still have to remind myself of pretty consistently is don't get laser focused on fishing that one type of water all day. Make sure you're fishing everywhere. The riffles, the runs, the pools, anything that looks like it might have fish in it, all the pockets, make sure you're doing your due diligence and you're fishing your way through those as effectively as you can. So if you make sure you put your flies in front of fish, make them look real, don't skip over too much water, I think you'll start to see a few things click for you out there on the water. So appreciate the question though. Thanks for sending it in. Alex from Arizona has our next question, writes in and says, it might be hard to believe, but we get clouds here in the desert state of Arizona, especially in our high country forests, which are our best kept fly fishing secrets. My question is, does cloud cover have an effect on the fly patterns or colors to be using in small streams? Furthermore, what effect does this have on the fish and the approach to take with them? Thanks for all you do and hope to have you stop by Arizona sometime, if you haven't already, for a chance at catching our native Apache trout. Alex, good question. Thanks for sending it in. And I've fished one spot in Arizona. I have not fished down in the forests at all. I'd really love to get down there. The Apache trout look like they'd be a lot of fun to go explore and to catch. So hopefully one of these days I can find the time to make it down there. But short answer to your question. For small streams, cloud cover doesn't really matter. What cloud cover is going to do is two things, really. First off, when it gets cloudy, that's going to spur some insect hatches, especially mayflies. They love cloudy, overcast, drizzly days. That's their preferred weather. That's when they want to hatch. So if you get some overcast, it can spur some bug activity. It's not a guarantee. It's not always going to, but usually if you've got some cloud cover, it's a pretty good chance the bugs are more likely to come off than if it's a bright, sunny day. And then cloud cover also ushers in lower light. And that lower light makes trout feel a lot safer about eating on the surface. So they're a lot more likely to eat dry flies at that point than, again, if it's a bright, sunny day. On small streams, though, you're not going to see this play out too much because trout tend to be very opportunistic in these small streams, especially up at high elevation, that they're just going to eat whatever looks real, regardless of if it's sunny or drizzly or not, because they've got a very short feeding window when there's a lot of insect activity for them to feed on. So they've got to go ahead and eat and have less discernment than bigger fish in more heavily pressured rivers down at lower elevations where the feeding season is a lot longer. Okay. So the rivers that you'll see this matter a ton on are your tailwaters, your large freestones, the rivers that get a lot of pressure. That's where you're going to see the overcast, days that will really switch that flip, it feels like, or flip that switch. I can't talk today. Good criminy. Flip that switch that will get the fish to start eating off at the top. Okay. Now, there is this old saying, you might have heard it. It applies mostly to streamer fishing, where on bright days you should use bright flies, and on dark days you should use dark colored flies. I found that to be really true in my experience with fishing streamers. So that's another way that cloud cover could impact your fly selection. You might change your color just a little bit there, but color is really not going to matter on those small streams up in the high country. Again, this is a bit of advice that applies a lot more to those fisheries that get a ton of pressure and that see a lot of people. Okay, that's when you really got to pay attention to this stuff. It's one of the nice things about the small high country streams is the fish are really eager. As long as you can make your fly look real and you get it in front of a fish, they'll often reward you, and it's really nice. It can make you feel like the best angler in the world, and sometimes you just need a day like that. So hopefully that answers your question, Alex. Thank you, and thanks to everyone who's sending questions this week. I appreciate it. We couldn't do this show without your questions, so make sure you keep them coming in. And that does it for the Q&A part of the show this week, but don't go anywhere because we've got the Live Real Life moment coming right up. Every week here at Untangled, we end the show by sharing a story and a picture from someone in the VFC audience who's out on the water living real life. We love to see what y'all are up to and to see these adventures that y'all are having. So if you've got a Live Real Life moment that you would like to share with us, there is a link to send those in down in the show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. And this week's Live Real Life moment comes to us from Marvin, who writes in and says, "Hey Spencer, a fish story. I live in southeast Missouri and don't get into trout. However, there is great trout fishing in southwest Missouri. But I love bluegill, bass, and whatever else latches onto my fly. I managed to bring this 36-ish inch carp in with my 8-foot, 9 5/8 inch 5-weight. Had to repair the tip from a previous encounter, don't ask. And with a simple jig that I put together. I initially thought it was a catfish, but after about 30 minutes of tug-of-war and dodging submerged treetops, I managed to land this monster with a dip netter's help. I'm sure this may be nothing compared to your large trout experiences, but it was real exciting for me. I've managed to land some pretty good-sized catfish, but none to this size. I know there's a difference between fishing for and just latching onto a spectacular catch, but still the same, it was an exciting adventure. I like your and Alex's podcast and enlightening videos, even though, like I said, I don't get into trout, but I still learn things and get charged up by your sharing knowledge and enthusiasm. If you ever make it to southeast Missouri, let me know, and maybe we can find a few bluegill. Even fry them up with a Diet Coke or a nice cold Michelob Ultra. Keep a tight line and memento mori, Marvin." Marvin, congrats. That's a toad. 36-inch carp. That ain't nothing to sneeze at all. And you said, yeah, it may not live up to the trout experiences I've had. I've never caught a 36-inch trout. Okay, that's actually a lie. I've never caught a 36-inch trout on a fly rod. I caught a 42 and a 40-inch lake trout on conventional gear. Never on a fly rod, though. My biggest on a fly rod, I think, is 28 inches-ish, something around there. But anyways, this is awesome. These big fish on a fly rod, still big fish on a fly rod, and they're fun. So congrats on being able to catch something like that in 30 minutes on a 5-weight. Man, that's crazy. I never go for carp with anything less than a 6. So the fact that you managed to get that in on a 5 is incredibly impressive. Just my hat's off to you, man. Thank you for sending that question or that story in. I really appreciate it. And with that, we are going to wrap the show up this week, folks. Thank you so much for being here, listening to the whole show. It helps us out more than you can know. And if you want to help us out even more, tell everybody you know about VFC and Untangled. Rate and subscribe to us wherever you're listening to it as well. That helps us reach more anglers and help everybody live real life, which is what we're all about here at VFC. And speaking of that, go out, get some time on the water before it gets just way too cold to fish. And until next week, live real life.